happy customer experience to everyone. I just started recording, so I thought I'll repeat that so we don't forget why we're here, in case this big, nice logo we created didn't give it away. We're still having a bunch of people show up, so we're just going to give a few more minutes to we go to trickle, and then we'll
If
start.
people want to put in the chat where they are, that would be great, so we can all see where everyone is.
Oh, wow, we do have.
Nice.
I love it. Well, interesting fact, I flew back from London last night and I brought the Paddington bear with me. So I am very much familiar with where you are. Okay, we still have people coming in. I don't know what's the protocol, to be honest, how long we wait. But they keep coming. Rachel, you're very good at admitting. It's like this.
Thank you.
This the casino. We actually had a guest, a speaker from the casino industry that couldn't make it last minute, but it does feel like a machine because people keep rolling in. Okay, I think we have good enough of a volume to start, and then as people come in, they'll get used to where we are. So welcome to everyone. We're very, very happy to have all of you here. This is the second time that we're doing Customer Experience Day celebration in the form of a webinar, and that we invite speakers from across the different industries. What we found out is this is extremely productive conversation and helpful for everyone. So we're thrilled to have 3 industries represented today, and also 3 dear colleagues of ours that share the passion for customer experience with us. What we do is definitely a very hard work because it's cross-functional, but I think what they do is even harder because they make our work possible. They're the ones that convince the people with the money that the customer experience is worth investing in. But before I start babbling about customer experience in general, I'm going to start with the introductions of today's panelists. So welcome to all of our guest speakers. And we're going to start with a general question of telling us your name, your industry, what you do, and what is customer experience to you. And we will start with Monica, Scott, and Sofia at the end, because that's how you are on my screen. Monica, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So grateful to be on this panel today and excited to speak with you all and hear your feedback and questions. I have the honor and pleasure of serving as the AVP for Student Support and Academic Operations at St. Francis College in downtown Brooklyn. And I have 20 years of experience in higher education and really managing all aspects of the student life cycle from arrival to graduation. And I am super passionate about really creating real solutions to serve students, reducing the equity gaps, eliminating barriers to student success, and ensuring that we're not creating barriers to begin with. I oversee academic support and student success programs at St. Francis. So it entails really leading strategy for departments that oversee success coaching, our accessibility and accommodations office, tutoring, opportunity programs, as well as overseeing a student success technology platform, which we've been really using to help our student support and success experience. And my teams also oversee several grants and scholarship programs. So I have experience with RFPs and the whole project implementation process. And I'm just really excited to share ideas that, that we've been learning from various industries to ensure that our higher education experience is very rewarding. And in terms of St. Francis College, if you have not heard of us, if anyone here is from higher education, please drop some information in the chat so I can see if there are any higher ed friends here. But a lot of industries these days are, leveraging information from one another to make sure we're best supporting our stakeholders. So St. Francis College is the same. We're leaning into the information from various industries to make sure that we are truly staying student-centered. And I'll talk more about that later. So we are a private four-year institution, about 2,600 students. About 80% of our population hail from all the 5 boroughs in New York. We have over 80 countries represented for our student population. We recently became a Hispanic serving institution. And so we're really, serving a tremendous amount of BIPOC students, and our international student base is growing from about 150 students 5 years ago to over 600 students today. And we have large ambitions to grow our student base, which is also why it's so important that we understand our student experience, our customer experience model really well to make sure we can prepare for growth of students. Our mission is really rooted in Franciscan culture. And one of the things that's really core to our mission is something we call compassionate hospitality. And that's really aligned with, truly operationalizing, customer experience. Our newest leap, literally and figuratively, has been moving our campus. So talk about an uprooting of your customers, an uprooting of all stakeholders, is really creating a state-of-the-art custom campus for our students and for our educators. And one of the things that's been so great about that is we've leaned into the fully hybrid model, which for us means high impact in-person experiences and really leveraging technology to ensure our students have all the cutting edge information to be innovators for the 21st century workforce.
Thank you. Scott?
Amazing. Thanks so much, Monica. And before I start, a huge thank you to Liliana and her team for setting this all up. It's super exciting and really thrilled to be here and honored. So I'm Scott Resnick. I always, when I give my bio these days, I like to start actually with a personal context rather than professional. I'm one of these people where I have always been someone who loves to delight friends and family and people in my realm. I love to host big dinner parties. I send letters to people. It's really all about, even personally for me, creating amazing experiences for my friends and family. And that has always been something that's been core to my professional experience. And something that I pursued really early on in the travel industry, largely started first as a consultant at McKinsey serving airline clients, and then actually worked with Liliana and many other folks at JetBlue. Was there for almost 8 years and ran a bunch of different functions within the company on the commercial side of the business, but really gravitated to the roles that were focused on delivering an amazing experience to customers as they were traveling, because that's something that was just always really motivated me. And the role that I was my last role there that really resonated me with was running the frequent flyer program, the loyalty program for JetBlue, and just love that notion of how do you really create a delightful experience for people as they travel, to make them feel rewarded, to make them want to come back and travel again. And since then, I've kind of pursued this notion of experience and retention and loyalty in a bunch of different industries, but most recently was working as the VP of Member Experience at Ro, or you may know better as Roman. You've probably seen their advertisements. It's a telehealth unicorn that delivers healthcare for folks in many different verticals. Their primary function was around men's sexual health, erectile dysfunction, and hair loss, but they've expanded into many other realms, skincare, women's fertility, mental health, and things like that. And so just super excited to be here, and believe really passionately in the power of delivering an amazing customer experience for people to drive revenue and overall retention.
I've been to one of your dinners, maybe more, and I still talk about the kale salad. It is really something you give so much attention to.
You gotta
So
do that again.
Yes. Sophia, take it away.
So thank you again for having me, and really nice to be on this panel with these other great panelists. So my name is Sofia Berger. I lead the National Transportation Business Line at WSP. WSP is a sort of, full service engineering services, architecture, planning, environmental services company, really focused on infrastructure. And like I said, I focus on transportation specifically. I have about 20 years in the field. And I think, like many engineers, it is very natural to start with the very functional aspect of the infrastructure projects that we work on, right? So, I'm very much focused on our physical infrastructure. So how do we make sure that, bridge stands and all of that? And I think over time, I've come to really appreciate how important the customer service aspect is to these transportation projects. I've always been very interested in the impact of our transportation projects. So not just building the bridge, but why do we need the bridge? Who is it connecting? What kind of economic activity would be spurred by the bridge? But I think, now as we've continued to evolve, I've become more appreciative of also, what is the ease of use of that bridge, right? If it's going to have those economic achievements, it needs to be easy for people to use it in the way that we're hoping it will stimulate different economic activity. And then taking it a step further, not only is it easy to use, but can it delight? Can it be even more? Can your daily commute become pleasurable because of the customer service experience that we've put into our physical infrastructure? And so, I think that's a really interesting aspect of transportation. And when I look at the transportation field, here at WSP, we do the entire spectrum, right? Aviation, maritime, highway bridges, mobility operations, and train, transit and rail. And, I think that when you think about the customer service experience, it's very different across those different markets. I would say, and I know that Scott and Liliana are more experts on this than me, but certainly airports have had that front and center, I think, for quite some time, really. How do we cater to this population that we have here? How do we make them loyal to our airport and want to keep coming back? And how can we really encourage them to enjoy their experience while they're waiting at the airport? I think when you look at some of the other parts of transportation, the experience is different, right? So we have all been at rest stops along the highway where we're just like, oh my gosh, let me just try and not touch anything before I get out of here, right? But hopefully maybe you've been to some where you say, oh, I didn't think I was hungry, but why don't I stop and eat here? I've already stopped, right? Same with train stations. Here in New York, you see Grand Central, a beautiful example of how you can have an important piece of infrastructure that's really a delight and seen as, quintessential New York. But, Liliana and I have the pleasure of, working on some thinking around what Penn Station could be, and how to make that a much more easy and potentially delightful situation for commuters, right? So, I think those are the aspects that are really interesting from a transportation perspective, and, are becoming more prominent in the thinking because customers have more expectations now. They have more information, right? They know that they don't have to stop at that rest stop. They could also just take the exit and go to the restaurant and go to another gas station there. So as they have more information, we need to up the value of the infrastructure we're building so that it has the results that we're hoping for through these investments.
Yeah. I'm particularly passionate, specifically bridges, you said, what amazing opportunity there is with light. And the lights, even now, many of our bridges are getting there. And it's just such a small thing. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot of money, but it just turns it into an experience.
Absolutely.
So sometimes it's just one concept that just kind of brings so much out of the whole experience. Well, I'm gonna move to a more customer experience question, just talking a little bit more about more actionable things, and again, back, Monica, to you, if you can tell us a little bit about, I'm gonna skip one of the questions just in the interest of time so we can get more engagement from everyone else. Let's go dive straight into hybrids and remote learning experiences, and is there such a thing, and what are your thoughts overall? I mean, again, even if we don't have people from education, we all have children, and everybody's thinking about this lately. What is the formula of that hybrid world that we're trying to build together in general across industries, but education specifically? And I know St. Francis has put a lot of thought in this, and you've been part of it. So what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're learning every day. There are new things that come that we have learned through the pandemic and post-pandemic, and how to make the experience seamless for our students, using the technology. We've upped the ante in terms of how much technology our campus uses to make sure that we can stay connected. And now it's really all about integrating all of those systems together to make sure that it is that seamless experience for the students and frictionless in terms of self-service. And so, we've learned a lot about the fact that we want folks to move between those two environments as easily as possible. So if our students come to campus and they need to see someone who's working remotely, that's very easy for them to go into a lab and then enter our virtual campus, is that they can easily see someone in person at the particular office, right? So there's service being done in both areas, that learning is taking place in both areas. So we moved into a model where many of our courses are hybrid, where there is in-person contact time that we've enhanced in terms of hours, so that students have these really great high impact times with their professors. And then there is work that they can do asynchronously, and then work with their professor online through online office hours. And so we've been, tweaking the model as we hear from our students. And I think that's really the key thing, is listening to our students, what's missing, what's been working, what's not working, to make sure we can be as fluid as possible. And we've really been, as I said earlier, leveraging the technology to make sure that we can have more insight into what's happening in the student experience, so that we're not guessing and we're not trying to gather that intel in real time. We can quickly access it through our technology systems to deliver a more rewarding and higher impact in-person experience, whether that in-person experience is in the remote or live, one-on-one, so that it's not interrupted or different depending on where you are in the environment.
Yeah. I full disclosure, I recently visited the campus. So, and I am an alumna. So alumna, I think this is the right way to say it. I was shocked. The way the classroom looks from what I attended is just so different. It's a little strange, but I know that's where the world is going. And then you have podcast studio, which is my best feature. I just love that you have thought about that as well, in terms of media.
And we have many diverse sort of spots for students to be, for that collaborative learning, for meeting with student groups, so that it used to be where, there's an office and that employee sat in that office delivering whatever support experiences. Now that employee can be in the cafeteria working on their laptop, and you can come meet with them. Let's go into a pod and talk together in that space, right? Let's meet in a multi-purpose room. Let's sit on the grand staircase, right? So we custom designed it to be really integrated into all different kinds of diverse experiences for students and our staff, so that we can be more fluid and not siloed, right? Because that's sort of the enemy, right, of connection and community, is when folks are siloed. So the campus design is fluid and open, a lot of glass, a lot of open air areas. And so we've been finding it very exciting to see how students are using the spaces innovatively.
Thank you. Well, Scott, let's talk about healthcare. I know for once, I know that there's one person here from a brand that I've been talking to for almost a year, and she's tackling patient experience in her company. So what, I guess I always think, because of, I'm very biased. So I'm always like, patients should say everything. They should drive everything. But I know you and I have spoken about this back and forth of to what extent patients should be part of the design of healthcare, and how do you balance that with the reality of what it is?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's funny, as I mentioned in my background, like I don't come, from a organic healthcare background. So my experience most recently working in healthcare was really illuminating when it comes to CX, because it was my first time really seeing it through that lens. And I think within healthcare, right, the issue is that you have a really bifurcated kind of system, right? You have, like, obviously, if you talk to anyone who works for a healthcare company, what they will always say is the patient outcome is really, and particularly health outcomes, is really what we're optimizing for, because it's sort of their health. And particularly if you talk to doctors or clinicians who are dealing with that, That is what they are solving for. But I would say, if I had to, put myself in their minds, right, where they're coming from is, the point is, all I care about is getting the best outcome for my patient health-wise. But from a broader CX perspective, right, I think there is so much more that goes into the experience, right? Obviously, like, yes, you will always optimize for getting the best health outcome, but think about your experience working with an insurer and getting your payments processed, or think about your customer service experience with a health provider. Like, there are all these aspects, like the journey that you go through as a patient, or even as a family member of a patient in healthcare, is so broad. And so, to me, I think when you talk about like where should patients be in that experience, it's such a broad thing. And I think, if you ask people what CX means within healthcare, if you talk to probably traditional practitioners of customer experience, they would say it really has more to do with like your process of like the service that you receive, and going through the process. And then if you ask the doctor, they would say, well, did we get to the right health outcome? And I think the bigger, the bigger challenge or question within healthcare is like, how do you merge those two things? And also, how do you help both the clinicians, doctors, nurses, whomever, understand that like the experience that patients have is broader than just what they receive as their health outcome, but also like, how do they feel about going through the process and seeing the patient, seeing their clinicians and hearing what is coming back to them, and dealing with all the customer service, insurance, shipping, whatever it may be, issues. Like, how do you really merge these questions? And I think that's where, if you can bring the patient's voice into that moment, it becomes very powerful. And particularly for clinicians who are less exposed to traditional CX, topics and theories, it starts to become very powerful to say like, hey, like, just giving them like your diagnosis or your outcome is actually not a fully developed experience for them. So I think there's a huge opportunity to really merge those two experiences within the healthcare ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think, again, I don't know, if we all know the biggest downfall of CX is it's very hard to prove the business case, but I think there is a connection between healthcare outcome and the healthcare experience in terms of how I feel. Specifically, I have been close to people who have reproductive challenges, and that is such an emotional journey for women. The emotional health and the physical health are very interconnected, but still work in progress, as they say.
Yeah, for sure.
We have two polls, and we're going to go to one of them to just make sure you guys are engaged, and then we're going to move to Sofia. Rachel, are you launching or am I launching?
Should be up on the screen.
Should be up on the screen. So we have just a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind helping us get some information from you and your take on these two questions. The first one is, what is the biggest concern that you have when you think about creating a customer experience program? Some of the answers you see are just informed from our experience and what we've seen real life. Others is what we've heard from our colleagues across the world. We just wanted to see what have you thought? What has been keeping you up at night? And I see a couple of, or actually even 4 now, of none of the above. It would be great for the none of the above to just put in the chat if there is something that we're missing that is a concern for you, so we can be aware of that challenge. Budget, okay, Karen. Budget, meaning that it's too expensive. That's your concern. It's gonna go wild before you know.
I'm going to stop it. We're at 74%. You're 75%. Here's your last chance. 76. All right.
Did you share results? Because
Can you see now?
Yeah, I think we can. So who is the winner? The winner is how to make more people at the leadership level truly get it, and the operations and overall change management, of course. So these are the things we thought we would give you just little pointers of what to do next. We have seen IT be a challenge across organizations. And one of the things that we think can help with this is going back to the drawing board and coming up with a business case, because that part of what happens is we don't think IT is part of the system at all. And then no matter what company you're in, very, very quickly you figure out that's a bottleneck or there is a challenge or dependency there. Even in infrastructure projects, we're finding that, which is hilarious. We're having these conversations now. And in terms of operations, I think that becomes more of visualizing it. The leadership piece, one of the things that we've seen work very well, and agree, that's from museums to actually healthcare. We have colleagues that have done that in healthcare, is to really figure out how to connect the leaders to the customer, kind of shorten that distance, make the customer real. That can be done through research, and we're working with Sofia through some of this, is literally bringing that story in a very tangible way and a real experiential way in the boardroom or in the decision room, wherever that level is. We had a healthcare professional colleague of ours that I was very proud of. He used to make his exec crew go to the rounds with the physicians. Once a month, they had to go in and meet with patients. That changed tremendously the buy-in at the top over time. Anyone else has any ideas from our esteemed panel of how to address any one of these challenges? Have you done something that works for you?
Yeah, what I would say, Liliana, is I think it's also tying it back to revenue outcomes for people, right? Because money talks.
Right.
And I think if you can go through, particularly in a digital environment, and my most recent thing was at a digital healthcare environment where you could see very clearly where people were having issues in their journey. If you can show that having a poor experience at a certain point of that journey was causing them to either not convert or not retain or not renew, whatever it may be, I think the money talks with a lot of these folks too. And I think particularly in a space like ours where, not everyone understands it as well as they should, it's like, if you can reframe the interaction in terms of like what it might mean for out of customer lifetime value or retention rates, that actually really helps light a fire under these people to say, oh, I have to rethink like this experience for people.
I think another thing that can help too is having them speak to others in the industry that are in a similar position. I think this works for both the leaders and the operational camp, right? That may be a little harder when you're in private industry and maybe a direct competitor doesn't want to talk to them, but maybe Monica in education, it works. And certainly for us in public agencies that are working on these infrastructure projects, if you get this push, it's impossible. You can't run a train station and do what you want to do. Well, why don't you go talk to this colleague at another train station somewhere else in the US or somewhere else in the world and talk to them about how they're making it work and why they see the benefit in that. And maybe that helps to cut down that it's impossible and it's not worth it.
Yeah, good one.
I agree with both Scott and Sofia. I think, pulling on the purse strings, if you will, with showing like retention numbers, right? And looking at our exit counseling data is something that we do. Could we have prevented the student from leaving, using our student experience, for example, but also to Liliana's point and Sofia's point with pulling on the emotional elements of it and connecting them to others, right? That empathy, explaining the story of a student that could have had a better experience, and look at how some other colleagues or companies are using information to improve the experience, right? It makes that sexy feel of, oh, we could be doing that. That's cool. And now that, emotional element of that student story and how they could have impacted it had those processes, procedures, or whatever went wrong could have been improved.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, guys. So, Sofia, let's talk about infrastructure. I think for me, it's what I think is going to be more interesting is to talk a little bit more about the process and what we think together can and should change to make customer experience be part of the RFP process overall, and to see that be part of the solutions that we see overall.
Yeah. So before I answer with, how to work it into the process, just your earlier comment made me think about bridges and lighting. And I just, a great customer experience story is to look up the Dragon Bridge in Vietnam that we designed several years ago. This was a design competition, and we had two teams that want to design one, a kind of more staid bridge, a more traditional bridge, and the other one where the arches were actually a dragon with the head up at one end. And we don't know. I mean, it kind of, is more tied into their history and their culture, but it's kind of gimmicky. Are they going to go with it? And they loved it. And now, honestly, you see it on all their promo videos as a country. Anytime you see this, a movie, I just saw a movie the other day that was filmed in Vietnam, and they were showing the Dragon Bridge. They even asked us if it could breathe fire. So it breathes fire and it's all lit up, and they have these national events and days around it. So, really understanding what drives your customer and how to include that into what might seem a boring piece of infrastructure is a great way of making it more relevant to people. So I hope you're all Googling the Dragon Bridge in Vietnam now. But in terms of the design phase and how to incorporate it in, three maybe concrete things to think about. One is just putting the customer objectives much earlier in the process, then looking at the functional needs and solving the conflicts. I think this is actually the exact same point that Scott was making before in terms of what the clinicians are trying to do and what the patients are trying to do, and making it more cohesive between the two. I think for us, it's the same thing. It's, your passengers on the transit system, say, and your train operators and your station operators, who have a very clear responsibility to make sure that this functions correctly. But, sometimes there seems to be this hierarchy, and there's this assumption of conflicts between the two groups, and it doesn't need to be that way if we bring the customer objective much earlier on into the discussion rather than the end of a 10-step process. The other thing I think we need to think about in infrastructure is that we need to figure out how to be more flexible in our designs, right? So, unfortunately, when you're talking about building infrastructure, I can't just say, oh, well, this policy didn't work, let's change it, right? A lot of what I'm talking about had to be built and put in place. So to use a very, specific example, we were talking to someone who had renovated a train station in Europe. This was over a decade ago, or about a decade ago, probably, but mobile ticketing was just starting to take off. Mm-hmm. So they had to decide, how many ticket windows, a traditional ticket window, are we going to put in? And there were two train operators at that station. And one said, this mobile ticketing thing is taking off. You can cut our 10 windows down to 1 in the future because we're not going to need it. And the other train operator was like, we don't know if this mobile ticketing thing is going to take off. And we have these huge ridership projections. So instead of 10 windows, we need 20 windows. So the guy building it was like, well, let's just, split the middle and not be controversial. And we'll just stick with the 10 that we had before, right? And what they did that was really smart is that they built them in a modular way. So that then over time, if it did take off, they could take out those ticket booths and put in more kiosks, or put in a different kind of, mobile ticketing or things like that. And so, I think that's something that we need to think about more in transportation, because the technology is moving so quickly and the user expectations are moving so quickly that we have to be flexible. And then the third thing that I'll say in terms of how we think about this is that we also need to be much broader in terms of the customers that we think about. So in general, the topic of equity in infrastructure is something that we're talking a lot about in an industry. And there's a lot of poor examples of, in the past, things being designed for one group instead of a broader group of potential users. So one example that might resonate with folks is, maybe a new transit station or something was put in and it's filled with incredibly high-end stores, like very luxury spots, even luxury food spots, say. Well, is that really catering to the broader audience that we want to be using this facility, right? That we want to encourage to see as a sense of place in that community. Maybe we need a range, right? So that we're being more inclusive in terms of who we're thinking of here. And there's lots of examples of that in terms of tolling, in terms of, other things that affects infrastructure and how we think of the user base. But in order to be more inclusive in our design, we need to be focused on who the customer is and a broader definition of who the customers are going to be.
Yeah, no, amen. I mean, I just, for those who came from UK later, I I just came back from London, and even there I was somewhat, surprised that many of the stations in zone 1, even in London, did not have escalators. They didn't have elevators either. So, Sofia, they were better in that way. It was somewhat interesting to think zone 1, you would think would be the closest to the hubs, the transportation hubs. So you would have more of that. And what you were talking about, the train ticketing offices, resonates very much with us, because when we did the self-tagging lobbies, there was very much a discussion around rent and how much, especially if we share spaces in airports that are shared, how many tickets do we want for check-in? Because over time, you probably should have less infrastructure and have some savings there. But it was this type of a risk again, how much of adoption you're going to have with the kiosks, and what would happen, how many people would need assistance and queuing and all that. So having that really vision and risk taking when you design for the long run is such a hard thing. I'm seeing such a hard thing to sell because of the risk averse people. And what will happen if the tech fails? That's another one that we are kind of faced with when we build infrastructure, because you always have to build for when there is a fire in the church, as they say. Thank you so much. Rachel, are we ready for our second poll maybe? So we're going to have a second quick poll for all of you to give us your take on. This is around urgency. I'm sorry, I think this is still the first question from what I'm seeing. Oh, no? Okay. Sorry, I'm forgetting my own question. Sorry for the audience. So this is around urgency and how, again, we see customer experience. We have colleagues of ours that actually called this decade the decade of experience. The experience decade. We had the digital decade before. Was, I don't remember what was the other one, but this is supposed to be our 10 years. And we were supposed to really rise to the top. And we're seeing us show up in the strategic maps of organizations. It's not like we were not on it. We're not on them, but now it becomes how can that be the top 3 that really gets funded? And especially when organizations have 60 initiatives, or some of our clients have more than 100 initiatives. The bigger the company, the more initiatives. So how do we make that part of that? In infrastructure projects, it's about goals, and how do we make it to be the top 3 or 4 or 5 things that get us points when we submit RFPs. It's always kind of the same logic of how are we doing in terms of prioritization. I don't know, we have a 64% participation. Maybe
we get back up to 75.
Even if we get to 72, going once, going twice. Well, we're not that. Well,
all right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well,
great. So as expected, awareness, we do not understand what customer experience really is, and the demonstration of ROI. I think we covered the ROI in terms of what it means and how to do this before. But I think for us now, I think the next big thing we see a lot is that there is a lot to do. So for those who said a lot to do, I would say it doesn't matter if it's us or somebody else, but one thing that we would say specifically for smaller firms that keep saying, I'm just buried in the operation. I think what we've seen other bigger companies do as well is to get an external resource. And the reason for that is you really have no time. There's no question about that in terms of prioritization. For the business case we already talked about. I would love to talk more about people do not understand what customer experience really is. That is a tough one. and we struggle with that as well. What I would say I have seen customers do is to hire external speakers to speak about customer experience or give a case study, a winning case study of, hey, this is back to what Sofia was saying, cultural exchange or best practices exchange. So the organization can see another organization that has done it and what it means to them. But I would also open it for our speakers if they have any ideas. What can be done to really make customer experience be more tangible, what it really means?
So I would, what you're saying really resonates with me, Lily, because I experienced this, and for anyone who's in our audience who is coming from a more digital platform or more of like a new startup type of thing, I think there's like this interesting thing that's happening where you have folks who are really digitally focused who think that like customer experience is purely what happens digitally. And that was something that I experienced in my last firm where it was hard to really articulate the notion of CX that goes beyond just what happens when you go into your app or it goes onto the website. And like those are clearly huge parts of the experience, but they're not all of the experience, right? The experience happens when you talk to your customer service agent, when you get your shipping package, or maybe when you don't get your shipping package, or when you talk to your doctor or you talk to your clinician. And so, to me, I think the question is like, how do you, if you are in a case like that where like you have a very strong point of view in a certain group around like what experience is, and I think this is really true in digital focused places now, it's like how do you help people see the broader view? And I think there are a couple of things you can do there. I mean, one of them is really like laying out the full journey, and that's, I know, a very simple concept within CX, but like it's often helpful for people who are purely digital to see like that the journey is not entirely digital, right? It can be like what happens when your shipment gets missed and you can't deal with that, or what happens when like you get a message back from your doctor and you don't know what to do with it. And so it's like bringing people through that full journey can be really helpful. And I think that similarly we did an exercise where we brought people through a full order. And we had representatives from all the parts of the business, right? Like digital, clinicians, pharmacy.
That's awesome.
Traditional customer service. And we really went through the whole thing, and some were good, some were bad. And you really show people that like the whole experience of how like a patient views this company is so broad, right? It's not any one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to really help people get a view of like, oh, customer experience is like not just me, it's all these.
Yeah, I totally agree, Scott. You make it personal, right? I mean, have you guys ever been at like a doctor's appointment and you're like, do I seriously have to fill out this 10-person form? I mean, has anyone tried to fill out this 10-page form before, right? And you just want to, I mean, has the CEO tried to fill out this 10-page form, right? And so, if you make it personal for folks, then they definitely understand better. A similar example is that, again, this Penn Station project that Liliana and I are hopefully starting soon to work on. There's this video you can see online of the head of the New York MTA took a whole bunch of reporters on this walking visit of Penn Station to really drum up the urgency. And he said, okay, well, let's pretend you're all Long Island Railroad customers now. Come with me down this hallway. I mean, can you believe how low these ceilings are? Can you believe how dark it is? Try and tell me where I go now. Where's the signage that tells me where I go now, right? And so, I mean, you can see this whole video online, but it was about creating that urgency by making people really feel what that experience is like.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
I can echo as well that even our physical space has been enlightening to our senior leadership about what's happening in the student experience, right? Where are they? What do offices look like in a hybrid environment? So we're constantly gleaning information from that. And I agree, with what Scott's saying, that some folks think it's all about just the technology, like the frictionless self-service, right? That's where CX lives and that's it. But what we've been doing is being able to use that technology to gather great insights about what's going on in the student. So then when we are meeting with them in person, we can really do a quality personal check-in, and we don't have to ask them mundane questions. To Sophia's point, I don't have to fill that out again. We know whether they're a campus leader, whether they are a primary caretaker, and we need to say, hey, do you know that there's some great time management workshops? Because you're an awesome person, you're wearing many hats, right? So we have all this, we're using the technology to gather important information so we can deliver that personalized experience. And learning it every day from our physical spaces too. So it's all about getting that intel to make sure that your mapping is correct. And the mapping has been, for us, very instrumental, really writing down and looking at our different personas. Are there overlaps in personas? What does that mean? So that's been a very effective exercise for us.
Yeah, it's very hard to organize. I mean, we've all been there. Many of us have been there, and it's a big ordeal, and it's the most rewarding in an organizational sense, an eye-opening experience. It just is, because so many people just don't see the world the way we do. We're going to open to Q&A now. One of the things that I'm big on is I really love having this, conversation with all of our guests, not just our speakers. If we were in person, I was probably going to be kind of walking through the place and just giving you mic and pushing you to ask questions, because I really think that's the best way to learn from each other and to have an interesting conversation. So please, for all of our guests that came today and took time, feel free to either ask a question in the chat or unmute yourself and just ask a question of any of our guests today and our speakers. We would love to hear from you. Please don't be shy. Anything you wanna ask, go for it.
We have a question for Scott in the chat. So for Scott, has there been any consideration to actual customer journey to include their trip to the healthcare location? For patients who have to travel long distances for treatment, the airport journey experience, which may color their mental and emotional health, can be a big factor in determining health outcomes.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the company that I was working for before Row was not an in-person experience, so we didn't have that question. But I do think like what you're asking is really huge within healthcare, which is there is also that notion of like the logistics of how do you experience, all the stuff of whether it's getting to the place or getting the stuff to you. And I think that's huge. I'm consulting right now with a startup company that's a telehealth startup in medical cannabis, actually, right? So trying to help people who are dealing with complex issues, pain, cancer, anxiety, whatever it may be. And there's a huge aspect of like that business, not just around like what is your treatment going to be, but like how do you get it to you or get you to it? And so that's a really huge part of this business. And I think it's been very untapped in the space. I think probably a lot of the work that's been done in that realm has been on the very high end of the healthcare space of like, if you can afford to really like, have your travel be, be considered in your way of getting there. But there's a huge untapped aspect of that business and of the journey in healthcare around like, how do you get yourself to the place? And so, even companies like Uber and Lyft probably can do more in that realm. And you can definitely see a world in which, good hospitals and good treatment providers are thinking about that journey of like, how do I make it easier for my person to get to my office or wherever they need to be treated? So huge opportunity in that space.
Well, and I know the question was directed at Scott, but since they said the word transportation, obviously I'm going to pipe in. I haven't talked about it in airports. I haven't thought about it in airports. It's a really good question, but I have thought it in terms of public transportation, right? And so every public transit agency in the country has a responsibility to provide some sort of paratransit service, right? So, service that is for those who cannot on their own use the public transit system. And some of those users are people that for medical reasons, maybe, not permanent medical reasons, but for current medical reasons cannot go by themselves. And this paratransit service can be offered to them. And every agency runs it differently, but, we all know the experience. You know what time your appointment in theory starts, right? But you have no idea how long it's going to take for the doctor to actually see you, or actually how long you're going to leave, especially if you're having, say, dialysis or some sort of procedure that you're going to be there for quite some time. And many of these paratransit services, you have to book well in advance, and you have to book a specific time slot for them to come and pick you up, because it's a door-to-door service. So I completely agree with Scott that there's much more work to be done there in terms of how we transport people back and forth, especially if there are routine areas that we know that they're going to and from, right? Certain medical facilities, how can we do a better job of providing that service?
Thank you. That was fascinating. All right, we have a question for anyone in the group. What is something that is overlooked in the transformation that a CX mindset focused on journeys does not readily identify?
Maria, because I know you for quite some time now, do you mind just elaborating this question? Because I got lost a little bit. What do you mean?
Sure. I guess we've talked about the power of identifying the journey and what that allows to create sort of a common language. I guess that creates some momentum. I guess I'm trying to think, is there something that in being able to sustain and execute on it, it needs to be built in to support that initial sort of aha and mindset of putting yourself in the voice and the experience of those who are going through a process or a journey in your world. What are some of those obstacles that need to scaffold the work?
So you mean sustaining? What is the sustainability model of something that's using that rigor?
Yeah, because one of the experiences I've had is that sometimes there's just initial excitement and momentum around it, but I don't know that people always see it as an ongoing way of managing. Okay,
now I see. Now I know what you're asking.
And so it sort of comes in and out of phase, like, well, let's do that, almost like we're going on a vacation, but it needs to be more intrinsic, I guess, is my question. Are there ways that you guys have found to make it more sustained and sustaining?
Yep. Okay. I think we got it. I mean, I think Scott knows, so I'll go with Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in my I hope I'm following your question perfectly, but like, one of the things that we did in my group at Row was put together really like a monthly review of CX with each of the vertical leaders that we served. And, it was nothing complicated, but it was really like, until that point, they had never seen the stats around customer experience and customer service. And it was very helpful to show them the history of like how it had been. Like, we had been collecting all of this data about CX, right? Customer satisfaction, response times, retention rates, order, contacts per order, all these things. But to really put it in front of folks and then repeat it over and over and over in many months, it was very, very helpful in kind of creating the foundation for like what CX did for their business lines, and also like highlighting places where we needed help to change the journey, change the conversation, whatever it may be. So I think, even though it may seem kind of boring, putting the data in front of folks and then doing it repeatedly over time is very helpful to say, like, let's track this and show like what's actually really happening in your business.
Okay.
I can also chime in because we've recently been undergoing a lot of this work, and is that it's not a side hustle, right? It has to be something that's like embedded operationally, and in an ideal world, right? It's built in from the beginning in terms of our performance reviews, right? It's part of our monthly, as Scott's saying, assessment model. so that it's similar to the DEI work that many organizations have undergone. It can't just be one office doing this one thing, and occasionally you go to a workshop or PD, right? It has to be a thread throughout. And so you need all the key stakeholders to say where do you capture that thread, and how do you keep reinforcing? And part of, to the poll of folks not knowing what it is that frequent development about what does culture mean? What are rituals? How do processes and procedures impact culture and, ultimately the satisfaction, so having the stats on the satisfaction rates of having that like to the top to show that it's part of the thread. It just has to be a full organizational commitment, because any one piece can drag the whole thing down, right? If IT is not on board, all of a sudden the whole thing down. HR is not on board, the whole thing goes down, right? So you can only do so much in a side hustle.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, one more.
So let's go with the last one. Sorry, Rhonda. I think we talked a little bit about how to get buy-in. So let's chat from the other side. How have you made it easier for customers to participate in workshops, roundtables, and feedback opportunities? How have you made the experience of participating in feedback more engaging and delightful? And that's for anyone who wants it.
Well, I mean, while the rest of the crew is thinking, I'm just gonna take this and say, for me, it really is about frequency and breaking it into smaller parts, and not giving someone a survey that's gonna keep them there for 15 minutes. And in transportation, even more so, if we're clever and smart, we can put the screens and just capture one or two questions, and then make the complexity being visible to them, and then append on the back end what's happening. And then I think, Scott, we have the mints, and some people just like to talk. So, but I'll let him handle that part. But to me, that really is, it's about you absorbing the complexity and making it very fast and quick and seamless on the front end.
Yeah, I would say, like, you can't do this in every place, but to the extent that you have the bandwidth to do it, I think creating the personal connection with your customers will always help in this realm.
Yeah.
When I ran the frequent flyer group at JetBlue, I spent a lot of my time, a really significant part of my time, like dealing with our top customers. Yeah. And they had my phone number, they had my email, I would talk to them, we would resolve problems. And it's like, it was a way both to like help resolve their issues, but also for me to understand where there were pain points. And even so, I ran membership at the Museum of Modern Art and in a prior job. And even just like going to events all the time and just working the room and talking to people, it's like the value that you get from having this direct conversation with your customer is so huge around your experience. And so I think that's, when you can do it, when you have the bandwidth to do it, it makes a huge difference. And like, look, we all work in different organizations where you're not going to have the bandwidth to do that in the personal way that I've talked about, but like, there are things that you can do, right? Like, it doesn't have to be your own personal email, but you can send, a proxy email for, your office or something to your customer base and say, if you have issues, send them this way. And I think all those little moments like actually really help you kind of get a pulse from what people really want.
Yeah, I think, this maybe isn't a new idea, having groups that are representative groups that you can go to recurrently to keep asking for check-in. But, maybe a new spin on it that we're seeing some in the transportation industry is having an equity advisory group for projects. We did a really nice study just now for Oregon. Oregon is working out their first tolling system ever. And we did an equity focused group because, as everyone can imagine, tolling, there's an equity component that's very complex there. And they did a really nice job. There's a lot of nice press that just came out recently about it they had half of the slots for representative community groups that they already knew were vocal on these transportation issues. And then the other half of the slots, I think it was half, but something like that, were by application. So people that were interested. So some of them were individuals who were knowledgeable about it. Some of them represented other community groups that were interested in being, active on that particular project. And then they met routinely. They defined together how they wanted to define the problem, how they wanted to focus on it, what they wanted to focus. And it's just a really nice way of creating buy-in throughout your customer base so that it's not just this public institution, speaking down as to what the customer aspects are going to be, but instead making it a much more inclusive process that then you regularly keep checking in with them as the design evolves, as the policies evolve, so that you're getting recurring and constant representative feedback.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. We're at time, literally 00. To the second. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for everyone who joined us that came to celebrate CX Day with us. We have the social handle, the LinkedIn handles of our esteemed guests today. We're on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn, so I thought that would be a great one. Thank you, Jamie, for coming. We would love to hear from you. As you know, feedback is a gift. So when you end this webinar, you're gonna have a little pop-up that's gonna ask you for some feedback, just as I already said, just one question. So it shouldn't take more than 60 seconds. Feel free to reach out to Petrova Experience and ask if you have any help or need in any advice in customer experience. We were very, very happy to have all of you today. And I cannot express my gratitude to our guests today. Thank you, all of you, for taking your time and coming here. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Christina. Bye, Maria. Hey, Amy.